My name is Joe Myers, and I'm with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is April 25th, 2012, and I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, meeting at the office of Jim Holman. I'll be interviewing Jim today as part of the Spotlighting Oklahoma Oral History series of the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. Thank you for meeting with me here today. Jim, can you tell me a little bit about your family, what your childhood was like?
My childhood?
Childhood.
Well, I was born in Kansas City, Missouri,
Mm-hmm.
and this would have been 1933, in the Depression era, and there were 6 children, mother and father, and we were not well-off people. Nobody was in that day and age.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad worked at Kroger,
Okay.
and he was what they called the tally man. The tally man is a man that works the docks that counts produce when it comes in. And he would check the produce and count the produce, and he would cull the produce. Anything that he didn't think was worthy and spoiled or tainted would go in a pile. And during the Depression, well, when the day was over, he got to load all that on his little flatbed truck that had sideboards on it and bring it home, and then everybody within a 2-block area would show up at the house, and they would strip the bad parts off and salvage what they could, and they would split it among everybody in the area.
Wow.
And one thing I remember very vividly was they made homemade bread at that time. The women would all be cooking the bread, and the smell of that bread was just fantastic.
I see.
So that's one of my memories as a child, and that's when they had the icemen that came around, and you put the sign in the window, and they would leave 25 or 50 pounds of ice.
That would be a big block of ice.
Oh, that'd be a big one, yes. And then going to school, in kindergarten, Yeager School, and then a little later, well, Whittier School.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up at Manual High School. They called it Manual High and Vocational at that time, because at that time, now we're into the 40s.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's 1940s.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very, very large school on 15th Street, which is now Truman Road.
I see.
And they had a full basement, I mean thousands of square feet, and they had the GI Bill to where they would train GIs, the vocational part, and in the basement of nights it would be filled with returning veterans and such that would learn their skills there in the basement.
I see.
And the claim to fame for Manual High School was the gentleman that graduated there. His name was Walt Disney.
Oh, I
So
see.
that was a claim to fame. And after going through my sophomore year, well, I'll back up a little bit. During that time as a child, I always had a job. I always worked, doing whatever. I swept out stores.
Mm-hmm.
I worked washing dishes. I got my Social Security card at age 8.
Mm-hmm.
I just learned to write my name, and it was Jimmy D. Holman, which I later had to change my name because that wasn't right.
I see.
And then when I was a sophomore in high school, and my brother was in the Marine Corps, he was a master sergeant, and I'd always admired him very much, and I wanted to be a Marine. So when I graduated from my sophomore year, I took my birth certificate and ink eradicator. Then there were 2 chemicals you could put on it, and I put one chemical on, and then I put the other, and the ink would fade away. And then I typed in where my year born was, and made it what I wanted to be to make me of age.
I see.
And then I creased it and folded it, and I went to the recruit depot, and I joined the Marine Corps, but there was a Marine Corps Reserve. And I joined on June the 23rd, 1950, and 2 days later the Korean War started, and they activated the reserves. So I had never heard of Korea,
Yeah.
but I found myself on a train heading for San Diego, and then through basic training at San Diego and advanced combat training at Camp Pendleton. And then they sent me straight to Korea.
Now, as far as you changed your age from 16 to 18
To 17.
to 17.
Yes.
Okay. So at that time, at 17, you could sign up
You
on
could
your
sign
own.
up.
Didn't have to have your parental signatures or anything like that.
They approved it.
Oh, they did.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, very good. So July 25th, is it July or was it June?
June 25th.
June 25th, you're on trains headed west to Camp Pendleton,
San Diego Recruit Depot.
San Diego Recruit
Yes.
Depot. Okay. And off to boot camp. How long was your boot camp?
10 weeks.
10 weeks. How was that? What was that like?
Because of the Korean War starting, it was very hectic. All the barracks were filled, and they set up tent camps out on the sand. So we were actually in tent camps, and that's where we took our training and stayed there in the tent camps. And it was 10 weeks of training, and I will say it was very, very good training. Very good training.
Okay. What kind of things did you learn there specifically? Anything that comes to mind that during that basic training that was either extremely memorable or extremely difficult?
Well, to get you in shape physically, which very, very rigid. You were up at dark, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, and did the calisthenics, and then you would go ahead and do whatever they had planned for you, whether it be go out on the boondocks or whatever. And then you had schooling on how to use your weapons, the nomenclature, practicing grenade throwing, and things like that.
So at the time you were 16, what was your impression of, I guess, the overall view of the United States going back to war so soon after World War II?
I was young, even though I knew they said it was, they didn't use the word war then. It was a conflict or a police action or whatever. And I really didn't relate to it being anything like World War II. I knew about World War II because my brother was there.
Right.
But I didn't even think, I'd never heard of Korea. I didn't know where it was or anything about it.
Sure.
But I just knew that we were going through some very vigorous training, and that's probably where I would end up, in the infantry.
Okay. So that was your, the infantry, that ended up being your MOS?
Yes. But when I got out, it was actually a cook striker.
Cook striker?
Yes.
Okay. But while you were at boot camp, that you were training to be
Infantry.
Infantry.
Yes.
Okay. Infantry. That's 031 or something like that, or
I can't remember. It's been so long.
So you were in training for 10 weeks there for boot camp. After boot camp was over, well, let me ask you this. Any friends that you picked up there at boot camp?
Yes. The first night in San Diego, because my brother was stationed there, he was going to take me, and there were other guys there that I didn't know, but he had room for like 6 in his car, and so we loaded up and went to Tijuana.
Okay.
And when we got to Tijuana, it was quite different from
Sure.
anything I'd ever seen.
Sure.
And with the guys down there, and when we got to Tijuana, we went into a bar, and we were all sitting at the bar, and there I am, a kid. I'm 16 years old. My brother's next to me, and all at once hear the women game, and they were all over us, and one of them, she's all over me, and it just kind of spooked me. And she looked at my brother, and she said, "What's the matter? Is he a cherry?"
Yeah.
And he said, "Yeah." And she says, "I cherry too." So when we got back to the base, the next morning, everybody's falling in. And again, we didn't even remember the names of one another. But when I came out to fall in, one of the guys that had gone to Tijuana looked down and he said, "Hey, Cherry."
Ah.
So that was my name through the Marine Corps.
Stuck with you.
Cherry Holman.
From the first night.
From the first night.
All right. What can you tell me about your initial military job, being in the infantry? What comes to mind about that first job?
Well, when you say the first job, you mean when we left there and went to Camp Pendleton, or?
Yeah. So you went from San Diego to Pendleton to train for the infantry, correct?
Yes. When I left San Diego, then you go to Camp Pendleton for advanced combat training.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go on, I guess you go on bivouacs. You go out and the enemy's out there, and then you're attacked by the enemy and how you react to that. And then you take your winter combat training on Big Bear Mountain, which is snow and all that, and for winter combat training. And you just get more in depth into what you would actually face into combat.
Okay. How effective was that training, do you think? How well did that prepare you?
Excellent, excellent.
Okay. Okay. Now, how long did that training at Pendleton take?
It was like 2 to 3 months, I forget.
Okay.
Probably 2 months, because in between there they gave us leave from boot camp for a week.
Okay.
And then to Camp Pendleton. So I'd say probably 2 months, I think.
Oh. Who were some of the men that served with you there?
Some of the first names I don't remember, but the last names were Hawkins, Hatch, Hilgenberg, Hokie, Holman, me. Those are the ones that, and Green.
That's because when you're assigned your racks in the barracks, it's alphabetical. Is that right?
Everything's off a chow line, your pay line, everything's alphabetical.
Okay. Okay. Did you know any of those guys prior to heading out to San Diego? Did you head out as a unit, as a reserve unit out there?
No, I met all of them in San Diego.
Met all of them in San Diego?
Yes.
Okay, so you guys were from all over the country?
Yes.
Okay. How did you guys entertain yourselves?
Well, we didn't in boot camp. In Pendleton, we could have
passes.
the weekend, like and oh golly, we would, of course. Then there was not a whole lot of money. As I remember, we got like $70 a month or something like that.
Sure.
But we would go to town and we would have a drink, and if it's a place that we could get a drink, because of the age limit and all that. Even though you're in the military, you still couldn't get a drink a lot of places.
Right.
And then the movies and such as that. Then we all chipped in together and bought an old car. And it was a horrible old car.
Yeah.
They wouldn't let us bring it on the base because it was so bad. And we didn't have insurance. So we had to park it in front of the base. And then when we would go out and everybody get in it, pack in it.
Yeah.
Anybody that we knew, if they could fit in there, and we'd go to town in that car, which would be Oceanside. That was the closest town.
Okay. Do you remember what kind of car that was?
I'm not for sure, but I think it was like an old Hudson Terraplane.
Oh, man.
Where the hood was longer than this table here.
So as far as while you were in service, where did you travel while you were in service? All the different places. Do you have just kind of a short list of where? And this
You mean in Camp Pendleton, or
just all over during your time in the regular Marines?
the only duty that I ever saw in the Marines was San Diego Advanced Combat Training, and then straight to Korea, and served my time in Korea. Came back on a troop ship to San Francisco, and then trained down to San Diego, and then went in and was mustered out and went home. So I never was privileged to see anything other than that. As a matter of fact, at that time, I remember coming home, I saw a big billboard about join the Marine Corps. And I had to laugh because it showed a Marine with an M1 rifle, and he was looking through the sights of the rifle, and it said, "See the world through the sights of an M1." So that's how I saw the world.
Wow. I guess on a lighter note, were there any pranks that you guys pulled on each other while you were in training?
I don't think you want me to mention them on here, though.
That it'd be fine if you're fine with it. We'd be fine with it as well.
I don't think some of these guys would, though, what they pulled.
So, what were some of the pranks that would go on that you guys would pull on each other?
Well, the DI, I wouldn't say there were pranks that he pulled, but like Hokey one time called his rifle his gun, and he made him come front and center in front of the whole platoon and take his privates out, hold his privates with one hand and his rifle in the other, and say, "This is my rifle, and this is my gun, and this is for work, and this is for fun." And he had to go up and down in front of everybody and do that.
What unit were you in when you shipped out from Korea? Now, you shipped out from Pendleton?
Shipped out from Camp Pendleton.
Okay.
And I just, as far as what unit I haven't any idea. At that time, it was everybody that went over was infantry, though. It was, and they stacked us on the ship. I believe there were 7 bunks on top of one another, and we ran into a storm on the way over. And for 2 days, after 2 days, we had lost ground. The storm was that bad, and everybody. I didn't get sick, but I think everybody on the ship was sick, and they would run upstairs to get some air and throw up over the ship. But when they throw up over the ship, that wind would catch it and throw it right back up on everybody.
Oh, man.
So it was pretty messy and pretty bad.
Oh, man.
And then we went to Kobe, Japan.
How long was the trip over to Kobe from Pendleton?
It took us, as I remember, 10 or 12 days to get there.
Okay.
But we had lost some time, too.
Because of the storm?
Yeah. And then when we got to Kobe, we got just a real short leave. When I say a short leave, maybe 5 hours or something like that. But the reason we went to Kobe is to leave all of our uniform, all of our gear, other than what you needed for battle. Yeah.
I see. So you're coming in late December, early January?
No, this was March.
This was March.
Yeah,
Okay, this was March.
Yeah, we're up to March now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're coming in from Kobe. How long were you there, and where did you go from Kobe?
Busan.
Busan.
Yeah.
Okay.
We landed in Busan on April the 3rd. And I remember as we were debarking the ship that as we got off, I just, knowing it was Hokey's birthday, I forget what I had. I had a little something, and I just stopped because, again, alphabetical, we're right next to one another almost always, and I started singing "Happy Birthday" to Hokey, and the whole ship joined in "Happy Birthday." So that was quite a birthday for Hokey.
Yeah, that's outstanding. Um, so that was at Pusan.
I was at Pusan. Yeah.
What was the plan at Pusan? What were you there to do, and then from there moving forward?
When we got off of the ship, we had no idea what's planned for us. But at that point, getting off, they're directing everybody to trucks. Different trucks, different areas, and so we got over to the truck we were to get on, and after it was loaded, and trucks started taking off in a convoy. And they were heading north. And I went with Able Company, as did Hokie and most of the others with our alphabetical deal. And that was the first night there, and then and that was on the line at that time. And then the next day you wake up and it was pretty much stationary. So you get your feeling of what's going on, what's happening. And then that night, the first full night there, Hatch was a BAR man. And in the wee hours of the morning, I don't know, 2, 3 o'clock, whatever, Hatch cut loose with his BAR. And so when he did, and of course you can see the fire and see kind of where they're going and all that, and some others joined in and all that, but then it subsided, and the next day what happened was Hatch had the watch, and he kept looking at this tree, and all at once the tree started moving and had legs and arms, and it was his imagination. But he woke everybody up anyhow.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure he did. Might explain to us what a BAR is.
A Browning automatic rifle. It's kind of like a machine gun, only it's not a machine gun. It's clip fed, where the machine gun has them going through. The BAR is clip fed.
I see.
But it's automatic weapon.
Okay. And you were, if I understand correctly, since you're on the line, everyone's dug into foxholes?
Yeah.
Oh, you have overhead cover for those
Foxholes or trenches or whatever.
Okay.
At different times, it was different circumstances. Sometimes you had better cover, sometimes you didn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you had to make improvements to that, to your foxhole, those were done by you and your fellow soldiers, is that right? Or
yeah, you had to dig your own unless you took over positions where the enemy had already had trenches and such there.
Okay.
You could use that.
Okay. What was there a period of time, or can you remember when you had your first direct contact with either the North Koreans or with the Chinese?
Oh, when you say direct contact, you could, as I remember the first time, it was at a distance that you could see them and you could fire at them. But we didn't get any return fire. We could see them in the valley in a column. And they were probably too far away for our fire to really be correct or be accurate. But there was artillery called in on that.
Okay. Do you remember roughly where you are or where you were in Korea at that point in time?
A lot of guys can remember where they were and all that. I haven't the slightest idea. Back then I may have known some of the towns. I don't remember any of the towns' names or where we were, and even the hill numbers. They didn't tell us hill numbers, and now I know guys know hill numbers, and I asked him, I never did know a hill number. He said, well, neither did I then, but I found out later what the hill number was.
Sure.
So we just went where they told us to go.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So your unit actually came in. But did you move up near that Chosin Reservoir or anywhere in that region? Or
No, we were, when they left the Chosin, they went clear on back to far South Korea.
Mm-hmm.
And basically I was on the push back north
I see.
with the replacement troops that came in, and now we're trying to, Chinese have come down so far, now we're trying to push them back.
I see. I see. Yeah. Did you have any close encounters, close upfront conflicts with the North Koreans or the Chinese?
Yeah, of nights when there was, well, within like 2 weeks of being there, that's when the largest battle of the Korean War took place.
Okay.
And that's when the Chinese had their spring offensive.
Okay.
And
We talk about that for a little bit.
yeah, as I understand it, there were, I forget how many divisions, but I believe 250,000 Chinese troops that amassed this.
Take your time. 250,000, that's a great deal of troops. That's a great deal of troops.
But they had their offensive. Anyhow, I remember there were, in the night, there were bugles blowing. Whistles. And of course we could see with the flares and such, we could see them. And it was a slaughter.
Yeah.
That went on for, oh golly, I think that went on for a couple of days.
And that was in April of
It was April 22nd it started.
1951.
Yes. Hilgenberg, who was, I mentioned earlier, one of the guys with us,
Mm-hmm.
he was killed in a sleeping bag that night.
By random fire or?
I haven't any idea. I don't know if they bayoneted him in a sleeping bag or shot him in a sleeping bag or artillery. I haven't. All I know is the word came down, he was killed in a sleeping bag. But he wasn't right next to me. He was, oh, I don't know, so many 100 feet from me. Hawkins got hit that night.
He was your buddy.
Hawkins, well, all alphabetically. We'd gone through boot camp together and all that.
Right.
And so did Hilgenberg.
Uh-huh.
But Hawkins got hit, and he didn't get killed. But, of course, we don't know because when they get hit and they're gone, they get them to the rear as soon as they can to be sent out of there, evacuated. The battle went on for quite a while, and there were, of course, those are the guys that were close to me. There were lots of others in that, but well, it was the largest battle of the Korean War. And this was just a very, very small part of the battle because here we are on a line that extends from the east coast to the west coast of Korea. And they hit the entire line. So even though there were 250,000, they were covering the entire line. And then somebody said, which a lot of this I don't even know to be true, but somebody said that the rocks, who's Republic of Korea, we were tied in with the rocks, and the rocks had been overrun.
Were they to your east or to your west? From where
They
you
would have
were
been
at?
to our right. We were heading north, been east.
Okay.
But the commander, whoever, they can plug the hose, they can bring up the reserves and whatever. But I heard that they'd give them way. And other than that, I'm just the fighting. One thing you do know is when you when you get there, and even though you've been through everything, and you accept it. You don't question it. You just do it automatic, like sixth sense. You do it, what you're supposed to do. But when I got the full grasp of it, and you see guys that are shot up wounded, when you get the full grasp of it is when you happen to go back, or for whatever reason, and you see the amount of body bags, and the choppers coming in. You adapt. And say you get over it. You don't get over it, but I guess you get hardened to it.
I can see how that would be.
Yeah. And then the best thing that can happen is when you see your buddies that are still there.
Still alive.
Darn, I wish I hadn't done this.
You know, I've talked to quite a few fellows, and I've got my own buddies from the military too, and a lot of them talk about a profound effect on their life from their experience in the military. How did this change your? Do you think this changed your path? Gave you more of a focus, or somehow affected you as far as how you moved forward with the rest of your life?
Well, there was one time after I was out, and I had the guys, after 25 years, we got together, and I believe there were 6 of us that had been there. And in talking, all 6 were very responsible guys in life. One of them, which was Hokie had a ice plant in Peoria, Illinois, and did extremely well. He supplied convenience stores with ice. Another one that when he got out, he went back and became a pilot in the Marine Corps and became a major. Then Paul Green in Houston. Paul got involved in politics and got pretty high up in politics in Houston. And all of them, everybody that was there, it seemed like they all became responsible citizens and did well in life. Mm-hmm. Now, was it because of that? I don't know. But I'd like to think it had something to do with it.
How about yourself?
Yeah.
What did you do after your time in the
Persevered.
Marines? Persevered?
Yep. When I went in the Marine Corps, you've seen pictures New York and ghettos and all that. I've never seen anything as bad as where I lived in Kansas City. It was a ghetto area. It was a horrible area. It was 18th and Prospect. And this was in the days of segregation, too. And this was the boundary of the blacks and the whites. And there were lots of fights that went on. There were lots of drunks, lots of bars. Then they called them winos, laying in alcoves in the streets and the buildings. The diseases were terrible. You would see some of them laying there that had syphilis with their nose eaten off their face. I can't really tell you how bad it was, but it was pretty dang bad. The hookers there walked the streets with their blankets under their arm, even with their children following them. Maybe that's one reason I wanted to join the Marine Corps. I don't know. And my mom and dad divorced when I was 5. And my mother became a waitress. That's all she knew how to do and did the best she could. It was a hard life. Really hard. I always had a job. I always worked as a kid doing something. Whether it was cleaning out stores or it was, I made little push cart. It was first of World War II that I'd go through the alleys. I could tell you the price of cotton, price of rags, steel, and there was what we called junkyards then. I'd go to the junkyard and they would buy what I had. The monies that I earned, I always gave my mom. It was tough. I would go out at night, crawl into the bridges. These are bridges over railroad tracks. And the steam engines would come by. That's when they had steam engines. And they'd throw that soot and everything up in the smoke and choke you to death. But I would drag my gunny sack behind me. And in the alcoves, I would get pigeons and put them in that gunny sack. Because I could sell them for a nickel apiece to the black folks. Because they ate pigeons.
Okay.
And I always had a way to make some money and do something.
Yeah.
And I was street smart. The taverns, they painted, it'd be like brick up this far, and then the windows, they'd paint about that much of paint around it so kids couldn't see them, but I carried my little stool. And I could look over it. And I was a pinball whiz. And they got to know me, and a lot of the guys would play pinball with people in these bars. And then they would see me, and most would come in and they'd tell the other, I'm too drunk to play, let this kid play, because they knew I could beat him. And everybody I played, I whipped them, and then they'd give me some of the money for beating them. So it was a tough life.
Yeah.
Like I say, I persevered. And when I got to Korea, you ask what kind of entertainment or what kind of luxury or whatever. Whenever we could, we'd play cards. We played poker and we gambled. And I was a whiz bang.
Yeah.
And I'd win money and then I'd hide out. I wouldn't go around any games or nothing until you could get your money out of there.
I see.
And I'd ship everything home except enough money to get started again.
Yeah.
So I sent home a lot of money from Korea, a bunch of money.
Yeah.
And the Stars and Stripes magazine over there, you could read, or newspaper, whichever, but they had the picture of this Mercury Monterey. And boy, I dreamed of that car all the time I was in Korea. I was going to get out and buy that car and drive it home. And I had enough money to do it. but things don't work out.
Yeah.
No.
That's wonderful. So you, going back to Korea just a little bit, so you were involved in some direct combat there. How many, in the time that you were involved there in that, in the battle, how many casualties do you think there were in your unit, just offhand?
In our unit?
Yeah.
Gee, I've never been asked that question. A bunch, but I couldn't say percentage-wise or whatever, again, because all I know is my close little group.
Mm-hmm.
My close little group, Hawkins was killed. No, Hildenberg was killed. Hawkins was wounded. Hatch was wounded.
Mm-hmm.
Green and me and Hokie made it, but I think Hokie got shrapnel in his butt later, but not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, and Hatch, like I say, he was totally disabled. I stopped when I got out to see Hawkins in Kansas City. Hawkins was a small frame guy, and he was in a wheelchair, and he was totally disabled and horrible. Just to go in and see him, I'm glad I went, but I wish I hadn't gone, if you can understand, because his head hung down and saliva would run out of his mouth when he tried to talk, and I don't know if he died shortly thereafter or not. He had a brother-in-law there, Hill. That he was married to Hawkins' sister. And, well, Hill he rode her all the time and everything, and Hill got a Dear John over there. She was divorcing, and that like to destroyed him. And something else about Hildenberg that got killed. Aboard ship, he had the top rack. He was staying in his rack all day long and wrote letters to his wife back home. Every day he wrote her letters. He didn't make it 2 weeks over there and got killed.
Man. Did you get very much mail back yourself, or did you get any mail while you were there?
No, I didn't get much, hardly any mail. I can't remember getting mail. No.
How about did you keep a diary or a journal or anything like that while you were there?
No, no, I wasn't much for doing that. Hokie did a lot of that, though. Hokie documented a lot of things. And like I say, we were real close. Even when we got out of the service, we were close. Matter of fact, after 25 years of being out, my wife asked me one day, "You ever see or talk to any of those guys you were in Korea with?" I said, "I wouldn't even know how to get a hold of them."
Yeah.
She said, "Well, sure you know where they're from." And I said, "Well, the only one I remember was Hokie. He was from Peoria, Illinois."
Mm-hmm.
She said, "Well, call information." And I said, "Bar, that's been 25 years ago." And she taught me to call the information, and they have one Jim Hokie listed. So I called, and when he answered, I said, "Is this the Jim Hokie that was in Korea with the Marine Corps?" He said, "Yeah, who is this?" "This is Holman." Cherry, where you been? We've been trying to locate you all these years. Everybody's been trying to find you." And he had a list of all the guys and their phone numbers and names.
Oh, boy.
So consequently, he contacted them, and I got some calls from them, and then I invited all of them to come. We had a little ranch down in southeast Oklahoma,
Mm-hmm.
and they all came to the ranch, and we had a great time.
Wow.
And just reminiscing about what had happened there.
Wow. Where were you when the war ended, when the Korean War ended,
I was back in civilian life.
back in civilian life.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did it ever end?
It hasn't, actually. We've been in a ceasefire since then.
And they're just
To this day.
Now he's rattling his saber
Again.
in North Korea.
Once again. Yep. Did you go back to work, or did you go to school when you came back?
When I got out of the service in Kansas City,
Mm-hmm.
I got a job driving a truck, a Teamsters union, and they paid pretty darn good
Mm-hmm.
because of my dad. He was a truck driver at Teamsters, and he got me on the same company. And I had an uncle that was a special agent for the Frisco Railroad. And my uncle said, "You don't want to drive a truck all your life." He said, "You need to get another profession, and I'll help you."
Yeah.
So after a month or so, he said, "You need to be a fingerprint technician." And boy, that impressed me, just that name, a technician, a fingerprint technician.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, what do I have to do?" "Well, you've got to go to school," and I enrolled in the Kansas City Business College. And at that time, it may have changed now, but there were like 70 women and me. And because it was business college and they're shorthand and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
Anyhow, I went to the business college, and he would bring me home from the railroad fingerprints to classify.
Oh.
And I started reading and studying how to classify fingerprints. I was driving a truck 5 days a week, making about $340 a month.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, my big day came. He knew the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, and he talked to a Major Griffin.
Mm-hmm.
And I went with my uncle and interviewed with Major Griffin. After I filled out the forms, we had him bring out fingerprints and give to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I went over with the equipment and I classified the prints, and then the guy came out and proofed them, and I did great. So I was hired on the spot, and I was to start the first of the month. And I would be on I would be on days for a month, and then I'd be on nights. And I'd work 6 days a week classifying prints, and then when I went on nights, I would do the same thing 6 nights a week, and they would start me at $225 a month. And after I would be there 2 years, I got like a $20 increase.
Uh-huh.
Well, thank God I went to business college. I guess it helped me add.
Yeah.
But making $340 and going to $220 from 5 days, I was 6 to 6.
Yeah.
And the Teamsters benefits were a whole lot better
Yeah.
than the police force.
Yeah.
So that was the end of my career with fingerprints.
Yeah. Yeah.
So from there I drove a truck, and then I wanted my own truck.
Hmm.
So I bought my own truck and held it together with baling wire and chewing gum and
Mm-hmm.
over the road, hauling swinging beef
Mm.
and backloads of bananas and chickens.
I see.
And then I realized this is not for me.
Yeah.
So I got a job again, Teamsters,
Mm-hmm.
driving a truck over the road from Montgomery Ward.
Hmm.
And I was very fortunate. I was like one of the first people hired from Montgomery, and so I had a lot of seniority.
Mm-hmm.
And I stayed with them for a few years, and then my run changed to where I had more time at home, and I never was one to sit idle, so I looked in the paper and I got a part-time job selling real estate. So I drove a truck days or nights, whichever,
Mm-hmm.
and sold real estate.
Mm-hmm.
Then you could have a real estate license. You could sell real estate without having a license.
Mm-hmm.
You would act as an apprentice,
Mm-hmm.
and this was in the state of Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
So I sold real estate, and I did pretty well. And then when I took my vacation, I did it full time, and I did great. So I took a leave of absence and did great. I took another leave of absence, and then when I went for my third leave of absence, they said, no, we know you're selling real estate, so you have a job here if you want it, but we can't give you another extension.
Sure.
So at that time, I had to make a decision. Am I going to go into real estate? Or am I going to stay here where I've got security, truck, seniority? And what made my decision is I thought I can always go back to driving a truck.
Yeah.
So I made the step into real estate. And since then, I've made a pretty good life in real estate.
I see. So we were talking about how your military experience had influenced your life after the war. You'd step back a little bit and talk about any, as far as during the Korean War, were there any times that you had overrun any of the Chinese positions or the North Korean positions or anything like that?
Yes, we had overrun the enemy positions, and at that time there was old trenches and bunkers and such, and so I was first at this particular one, which was a bunker that they had vacated, and so I claimed the bunker because we were going to be set up there for a while. So I claimed the bunker, and I stayed in that bunker for a few days, and then I was having a problem, and I saw the corpsman, and so then he sent me to the back to see the doctor.
What kind of problem were you having?
I was itching, just itching all over, terrible itching, horrible itching.
Yeah.
And then when I got back, when the doctor checked me, I had body lice from that bunker. And so they put me on a helicopter and flew me back, evacuated me, and they had tents set up along the river. And I went over to where the tents were, and there were showers in the tents, and I had to strip naked and dispose of all the clothes in a pile. And then they dusted me with DDT. And I went through the showers, and then came back and they dusted me, and I went through, and they did that 3 times. And then after the 3rd time, well, they issued me all new clothing, and I put everything on. I went back to the line. They flew me back up there. And every so often, few days, week, 10 days, or whatever it was, I would break out. I'd break out in blisters, and just horribly with blisters. And they would give me calamine lotion to put on the blisters. And this continued until it would clear up, and then it would come back and clear up. And then when I was rotated and left Korea aboard ship, we went to Japan, and when we left Japan, I broke out again aboard ship, and I was quarantined aboard the ship. I forget how many days, but I think it was like 4 or 5 days I was quarantined. And then it cleared up, and when I got back to the States and finally was being mustered out, they asked if anybody had any medical problems. And so I raised my hand, and they told me to stand over to the side, and then later they talked to me, and I told them about the problem. So they held me and they checked it out, and then a couple of days later they said, well, there was no record of it. And I said, well, in Korea I could understand that, but aboard ship I was quarantined, so there should be something in the ship's log of me being treated.
Sure.
And so then they held me longer, and then they said, no, there's no record in the ship's log. Now, if you want to stay here, we can go ahead and check it out further. You might have to be here like 60 or 90 days while we check it out. Or you can go on home. And I said, I want to go home.
Right.
So I went home, and then I went to see the doctor whenever I would break out. I'd see him and I told him what happened, and he would give me some medication and all that. And finally I just started, over the years, I would buy my own calamine lotion and I would put it on.
Mm-hmm.
And then after, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 years, I didn't break out anymore. However, at that same time, when I broke out, I would get like cracks in my hands and bleed.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't anymore. But one of my children, when she was born and she too had blisters all over her. And we had her in doctors, we had her in hospitals. And then when we came to Oklahoma, she also had a mental handicap problem along with that.
Mm-hmm.
And she ended up at Hissam out at Sand Springs. And they never was able to clear up the blisters and all that. She continued to break out, and she finally passed away at 46 with cancer.
My goodness. My goodness.
So I do not believe that veterans receive the proper information.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe they're checked out to see what really happened to them, to verify it and treat them.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have been in the Veterans Hospital a few times with pneumonia and other things. And every time I fill out forms or go in a Veterans Hospital, I'll mention that to them and all that, but it just passes by, nothing about it.
Yeah.
I do understand that since that time they've outlawed DDT.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they outlawed DDT in the late 70s or early 80s or something like that.
They shouldn't.
Yeah. Did you, when you came back, did you join any veterans organizations? VA or
Not
American Legion,
for,
or no, I'm sorry, not VA, but VFW or American Legion?
not for 60 years.
I see.
When I came to Oklahoma, my daughter asked me, after we'd been here a long time, she asked me in 2010, I believe it was, if she could make a shadow box of my awards.
Mm-hmm.
And I told her I'd never received any awards. And she said, well, everybody does. And I said, well, I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So I told her I would write off to try to get whatever awards I had coming, and I wrote to the Department of Navy, I believe it was, in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
And after several months, like 5 months, I'd never heard anything, so I went to the VA here. And I took a copy of the letter, and I'd sent the letter certified, and asked them if they could help me. But after I told them everything, they said, well, they would suggest that I write them again.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't. But lo and behold, about a month later, I received them. So it took about 6 months to get them.
Mm.
And then when I received them, when my daughter came over and got them to put them in a shadow box, but she didn't, she contacted the Marine Corps League, and they arranged a formal ceremony to be pinned, which they did at the Marine Corps Ball. And then just prior to that, she asked me to ride in the parade, which I've never done before.
Mm-hmm.
But she wanted to get some pictures to put in the shadow box.
Mm.
So I said, sure, I'll ride in the Veterans Parade. And when I went down to ride in the parade at the Marine Corps League, I didn't know it had already been set up. And they had the Chosen Few float.
Mm.
So they invited me on the Chosen Few with the Chosen Few guys. And after that, she asked me, well, she told me she got tickets to the Marine Corps Ball for me to take Mom, because it was her birthday the next day,
Mm.
after the ball.
Mm-hmm.
So I took the Marine Corps ball, and then as a surprise, that's where I was pinned, not knowing anything about it. And because of that, I became a member of the Chosen Few and also a member of the Marine Corps League.
Outstanding.
So now I am, but I wasn't for 60 years.
Why do you think you weren't? Was it just or was it a conscious decision, or?
No, because when I went back to Kansas City, I didn't want to stay in Kansas City.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't there very long till I left Kansas City to Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
Even with Montgomery Ward, I was stationed in Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
And then from Kansas, not knowing anybody in the military, I came to Oklahoma, and I knew nobody in the military down here.
Right.
So I was not really exposed to any of that until the deal with my daughter.
I see. I guess this is some of the other veterans that I've talked to have expressed I guess examples of the best in humanity that they've seen while they were in the military in Korea. You know, like examples of great humanity, and also because most of us tend to go a lot of times towards the negative, the worst types of humanity. Did you see anything that just kind of comes to mind that are examples of maybe the best examples of humanity, or the worst, or both?
No, I guess looking at the Korean people, I always thought the children were wonderful. I felt so sorry for the children. They tried to be so helpful and tried to do so much and do anything. But as far as the adults, I had hardly anything to do with the adults, other than those that worked around the troops that, in the pack trains, the ammo trains, and such as that. I never knew any of them closely, though. The children I did. I thought the children were great.
Okay. What would you say to if you had the opportunity to talk to some young men who are looking at joining the Marines nowadays during a shooting war? Actually, we've got 2 shooting wars going on right now. What kind of an advice would you give those guys?
It may be contrary to the way they think now, the way they train now, from what I read in the papers and what I hear. I hear such things as make sure that whoever you're in combat with has a weapon, or they do this, or if you do something wrong, you'll be charged with murder, or this, that, and the other. You get down in the dirt. It's either kill or be killed. And if there's a group that's coming after you, bunches and bunches, and I've even heard like waves of wheat and such. They never did appear like waves of wheat because they're coming out of the trees. As long as they're running at me, I'm not going to make sure each one of them has a weapon in their hand. To me, it's either kill or be killed. I think we are trying to make war too nice. You can't make war nice. If you do, you'll die.
think that's very valid. Very valid. Is there anything?
And that's something else. Well,
Go ahead.
I have never been. I never get emotional. I never. But if I'll be at the VA hospital, or try to talk, I get emotional.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so I guess the war has affected me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do it any other time, only when I think of it.
I understand that. I absolutely understand that. Do you think it's? I know today we refer to it as PTSD. Do you think you had any effects like that through your life that it's affected you?
I don't even know what that means. What's PTSD?
Post-traumatic stress disorder.
Oh, I've had lots of problems in my life, as everybody does, but it's never affected me. Nothing like Korea.
Mm-hmm.
I have woke up nights crying.
Yeah. That's part of it. That's actually one of the elements of PTSD is exactly that.
Mm-hmm. But I've never been to any doctors about it or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You think after, what, 62 years now?
Well, it hasn't been acknowledged as anything that's been valid by even the VA until 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. So it's nothing that anyone's been on the lookout for.
Yeah.
So,
Now I feel sorry for these guys going in now. I think they've got it tougher than we did back then with the rules.
yeah, they're very.
We have, I'm not saying we, I didn't have to play by the rules they have now. But if they have to play by the rules now, they really think the enemy's going to play by those rules? It's the people. We've got people in the White House and other, they don't know what the hell war's about.
No.
They have no idea. You want to make a clean war, you don't make a clean war. You don't do that.
There's no such thing. How do we, what would you say is the best way to educate people about the realities of war? Other than picking them up and plopping them down into a war.
People are creatures of habit. And if they're brainwashed enough through the powers to be, the war is clean. That you do this and you do that, and they try to make it as something it's not. Stop doing it. Tell it like it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would do more than anything. I think that's what people should know. How horrible.
Yep.
Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Nothing to be sorry for. Not a bit. Is there anything else that you think you'd like to add that we haven't covered so far?
Now really just one note.
Okay.
I'll say that is, you have your rations that you eat when you're over there, you know. They bring them to you, or they'll drop them in the plane to you. They used to have the famous three: pork and beans, meat and beans, and beans. Well, there was one thing that I loved more than anything else, and I would trade everything I had, and that was for ground meat and spaghetti. I love ground meat and spaghetti. And every time we got them, I'd always trade, and I had my ground meat and spaghetti. And then one day, a bunch of tanks are coming by, and that's wonderful because they let us get on the ride on the tanks. And I'm on the back of the tank, just enjoying life. And all at once one of the guys said, "Look, ground meat and spaghetti." The tank had ran over a gook. And the gook had been dead, but he ran over the gook.
Yeah.
And I saw that, and I was never able to eat ground meat and spaghetti after that.
Oh my gosh. Wow. That's definitely a terrible image.
Yeah.
Terrible, terrible, terrible. Well, I want to thank you, Mr. Holman,
Well, thank you for coming in.
for meeting with me today. It's been very, very, very enlightening, and be happy to see this added to our oral history program.
I hope it does some good.
I hope so too. Thank
Hope
you so
somebody
much.
can learn something from it.
I hope we all do.
Okay.